All right. Well, we're very fortunate today to have Monica here with us. She is the intern minister at the UU Congregation of Salem. Many of you know that the UU Congregation of Salem was instrumental in helping us get up and going, especially Rick Davis. So we have a special connection with that congregation. So we feel blessed to have you here today with us. Thank you.
We're doing something a little bit funny in place of a regular reading. You may have noticed an extra insert in your order of service with the lyrics to a Dar Williams song called The Christians and the Pagans. And we're going to listen to the song, assuming that the speaker cooperates, and then we'll have the sermon. In 1905, the author William Sidney Porter, better known as O. Henry, published a short story called The Gift of the Magi. It's the story of a young couple, Jim and Della, who are getting by on not much money and really longing to give each other special gifts for Christmas. The couple has two possessions which are their sources of great pride: Jim's pocket watch and Della's beautiful long hair. Della is determined to get Jim a proper chain for his pocket watch so that he doesn't have to keep using an old leather strap to fasten it to his vest. The chain is far out of her budget, so she summons all of her commitment and her determination, and she sells her beautiful long hair to get the money to buy the chain. And so that evening, there's Della, half afraid that her husband will find her short hair repulsive, because remember, this is 1905, and half thrilled to give him this beautiful watch chain. And Jim is taken aback when he comes home, not because he finds his wife unattractive, but because when she opens her present from him, it's a set of gorgeous hair ornaments intended for a woman with very long hair. And Della has been looking at these for weeks and weeks in a shop window, and she cries when she sees them, mourning this hair that she sold. But then she remembers her anticipation of giving Jim his gift, and she hands him the watch chain. And Jim says, Della, maybe we should put our presents aside for a while, because it turns out that Jim sold his watch to buy Della the hair ornaments. Now, O. Henry concludes this story by saying that it is the chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. I tell this story now because it reminds me of a story I heard from a colleague serving a church on the East Coast, a congregation that's almost 200 years old, located in upstate New York, which has its roots in the days of Unitarian Christianity and Universalist Christianity. In this church, there's a long history of Christmas services, of spending December with Advent, and some members of the congregation really cherish that season as a chance to reconnect with stories that are meaningful to them about Jesus and a chance to sing carols. And yet, one year, a group of these very UUs who love spending December with Christmas came to my friend, the minister, and they said to him, you know, Reverend, we're concerned that our friends in the congregation who are more atheist, more humanist, more pagan, feel left out in December. Maybe we could spend more services with solstice and with other winter stories. And the minister thanked them for their suggestion, and he considered it, and he thought, well, yes, I will adjust this December's services accordingly. And as late December drew near, some members of the congregation noticed that there hadn't been much reference to Advent or Christmas. And they came to the minister. And they said, you know, we love the services that you've been doing, but, you know, our friends in the congregation who really love when you do Christmas services, we're worried that they're missing out on the things that are special to them about this season. And when my friend tells this story, he always winds up smiling with joy and gratitude, and he says, oh, these beautiful people. Because there they are, just like the young couple in the story, each group giving up what it finds most satisfying in order to give their dear ones what they might find most satisfying. As Unitarian Universalists, we aspire to pluralism, and we know that that's pretty tricky. It's not as simple as saying that anything goes, and so everyone can have their own way. When we try to do that, we bump into each other. And we realize that not everyone gets to have their own way all of the time. Or we fall back on what scholar Earl Morse Wilbur says are our core historical values of freedom, reason, and tolerance. Except I think tolerance isn't really what pluralism means either. Tolerance is a kind of space for difference that means I let those who are different from me be part of my community. Kind of. If you are different from me, you can stand over there in the corner and I will tolerate you. We won't interact necessarily, but I'm not forcing you out the door. Now, I think the actual third value that we're called to is the value of acceptance. And acceptance means that when you and I are different, I don't just give you space over there in the corner. I invite you in. I talk with you. We sit together. We share about our differences and we learn about each other. Acceptance is harder than tolerance because it means that we form some kind of relationship with each other. And every time we form a relationship with another person, we are open to being changed. Even if it's just a superficial one, even if it's just the kind where you wave nicely at each other on the street, there is a connection, which means something may happen in you because of this relationship. A friend of mine likes to say that this is actually the only way to get anything done, because if you want to be influential, you need to be influenceable. Relationships have to be a two-way street to be meaningful. Now, change in this case does not necessarily mean that one person persuades the other to think or feel differently. We can be changed in relationship without giving up our principles or our opinions. Change sometimes just means having a new experience, like coming to a greater understanding of needs or perspectives which are quite different from ours. And sometimes the change that happens in relationship with each other is that a connection forms which is robust enough to call us into choosing to sacrifice our own self-interest in favor of another. All these things can happen in a pluralistic community, a community that holds and accepts many views simultaneously, a community in which atheists and pagans and Buddhists and Christians and Jews and humanists and theists and religious naturalists and more can share their perspectives with each other and stay in relationship. Maybe the relationship is just the kind where you smile at each other across the grocery store. Or maybe it involves deep sharing. Maybe the way you are changed in relationship is just the knowledge that you can be friends with someone who undertakes the core religious act of making meaning from their life in a very different way than you do. Or maybe the way you are changed in relationship does extend all the way to placing your efforts to bring about another's happiness above the thing that would make you happy. I remember sitting in a service in a UU congregation a couple years ago and thinking that this particular service was not my cup of tea at all. And in fact, I even looked around a little bit to see if I could sneak out without it being too obvious. And while I was looking around to see if there was an escape route for me, I noticed that a few friends of mine sitting a couple aisles away were absolutely rapt, just completely engaged in this service. And I thought, oh, this is what the service is about for me today. A reminder that it's not all about me, but that I share this congregation with a lot of people who are dear to me and who have different needs than I do. And so there I was, in relationship and changed by it, and being part of a pluralistic religious community, which was not just about getting my own way, but in fact about actively valuing the times I saw other people getting what they needed. So of course this can happen across theological differences. It can happen across differences in worship style. Sometimes it happens in the question of multi-generational worship, when some folks love having children in the service and other folks find them distracting and think kids ought to be excused. In our reading for today, this song that we heard, there's another kind of bridging across theological differences. And in that case, the relationships between people are pre-established. We have an uncle and a niece connecting their families at midwinter across a Christian-pagan divide. And, as the song says, finding faith and common ground as best that they are able. This act of staying connected to each other requires a few things of us. First, a presumption of goodwill, at least initially. And second, a real tolerance for awkwardness. The family in the song includes a little boy asking his cousin, "Is it true that you're a witch?" And Amber's partner, Jane, is able to see this as based in real curiosity, rather than giving little Timmy and his parents the stink eye. And although Tim's mother takes a little break to check on the pies, the family as a whole perseveres through the awkwardness and is able to talk about the things they share, their love of trees and snow and friends and the world. And so by the end of the song, there's a reestablished sense of family across the differences and across the awkwardness. This group of people is learning to hold both the needs they have in common and the different ways they get those needs met. In this case, the shared need for meaning and light and spiritual warmth in winter, and the two different traditions that meet that need. Christmas and solstice, or Yule, are both essentially about light in the darkness, as are many more winter holidays. Author Diana Butler Bass writes, Diwali, Bodhi Day, Hanukkah, winter solstice, Advent, and Christmas, all these sorts of holy days are celebrated when darkness surrounds, when all seems lost, when we hurt and think we have been abandoned, when all promises seem broken, when we light candles against the night, trusting and believing that a greater light will arise, when a single flame becomes a conflagration of compassion and justice. Now, I don't think Diana Butler Bass is a UU, but she sure could be if she wanted to. This human need is very deep in us, and it's easy to forget that there are many ways to get it met when we live in the sort of competitive society we live in. It's also easy to forget that instead of competing, we can choose to delight in the diversity of human creativity and ingenuity in how we get those spiritual needs met. From the major religious traditions of the world to the personal traditions of families, there are millions of ways that we remind ourselves of hope and returning light, and ways that we share warmth and love in dark times. When we lean in to our relationships, we find there's enough room for our traditions to coexist, and even enough room for us to yield to each other from time to time for the sheer pleasure of seeing our dear ones get what they need and knowing that they'll do the same for us. Maybe it's giving up something tangible, like selling a possession to buy a gift or sitting through a service that doesn't really speak to our tastes but lets us watch a friend smile. Maybe it's welcoming family to our table and having conversations from a place of curiosity, really wanting to understand why someone's tradition is important to them. And maybe it's the ability to say, I believe you, to someone whose lived experience is very different from ours. In one of those How to Survive Family Thanksgiving After This Election posts, I read this story. Someone was ranting with their experiences with something or other as a way to shut down a conversation about this moment in our country, and I saw my friend very calmly say, I believe you. My experience is different from yours, though. And then she proceeded to give a couple examples. The other person responded so much more openly and calmly, and I just thought, I believe you was so powerful, especially as an example of how we want others to respond to us. We are going to need more and more ways to practice being in relationship across differences now. We're going to need more and more ways to be pluralistic, to let our needs coexist with the needs of others, and more ways to value our connectedness as much as our individuality. Whether we are undertaking the revolutionary act of building pluralistic communities like this one, or hoping to change hearts and minds in the service of more justice, now is the time to practice the kind of acceptance that creates a real bridge between people. This kind of practice this winter will involve, as the song says, Lighting trees in darkness, learning new ways from the old, making sense of history, and drawing warmth out of the cold. The world has very great need now of people who seek understanding and practice acceptance. Let us be some of those people.
Thank you. Now we'll take a few minutes to be together as we take a few minutes to meditation. It's an opportunity for us to do this together. Many of us may have practices at home to do this, but there's something special about doing this together as a community. So a couple minutes. Right, and in true UU fashion, we take a few minutes after the sermon for a dialogue between us to hear more thoughts about the sermon for today. So Monica said she'd be willing to take a few questions or comments, so go ahead and turn it back over to you. Ted?
I'm struck with your sermon. I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you.
And it really strikes a chord with my heart. Enjoy.
You can repeat the nice part now you have a microphone.
No, I'm not complaining at all.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to accuse you you're going to complain. I just mean, you gave me a nice compliment. I appreciate it.
What I'm finding is that the results of this election have left us with the impending change in government that will be, instead of the people, by the people, and for the people, it will be of the business, by the business, and for the business. And I can completely relate to one person dialoguing with another person who has different beliefs. But how does this work with business?
I'm not sure how well this approach translates to a business. In this sermon, I was thinking a lot about our relationships with family members, with neighbors, with people that we see and have conversations with, relationships that may be strained, and what we do to build senses of community identity. I think we'll need different tactics to deal with business and with government and with that sort of institutional engagement. I do think the larger implication of this kind of work now is after there's been an upsetting event of any kind in people's lives, right, positive or negative, people get a lot of coupons when they're having a baby because the businesses know that that's a big changing event. And there's a real window of opportunity to influence people's habits right around big disruptive events. And I would say that one of my concerns for this country that I would encourage us all to do everything we can to work on is that we don't want to see the normalization of hate crimes. There was a spike after the election, and there's a huge impact on people's ability to do bystander interventions and say, no, not in this community. We do not treat each other that way. That is not okay. For people to be quiet means that the hate crimes get institutionalized as a new norm, a new habit. And instead, I think we can seize this moment and we can really teach ourselves and our friends and our neighbors and everybody that this is a time when our greatest habit should be always standing up for other people, always watching out for the vulnerable in our community, always giving extra to charity, offering your seat on the bus, walking somebody to their car if they feel unsafe. Let's hack our own habits and lives now and try and influence everyone around us, so that the grassroots American norm is at opposition to some of the terrible stuff we're seeing from the top.
Thank you.
Hustle, hustle, hustle.
I do appreciate your message. I have a brother in Iowa who's very conservative. He's probably everything we aren't. And I saw him a year ago, and he was going off on Obama. Like he turns red in the face. And he said, Obama has fired 60 cabinet members and generals and replaced them with Muslims. And I heard myself, I didn't say I don't believe you. I said, I don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to talk about that, because sometimes if someone is saying a falsehood which gets really circulated, how do you handle that in that moment? And I did go home and look it up. Mm-hmm. There was one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of these community norms we're called upon to build is that we refuse to let this be a post-fact world. What on earth is that? Truth still has meaning and facts still have meaning, and I think a majority of people do believe truth and facts still have meaning. There's a Buddhist teaching that says that anger is the bodyguard of grief, that people get into really angry and irrational things because they're hiding from their own pain. And it's really difficult. Somebody who's really invested in not dealing with their own pain, it's very difficult to get them to that place, to be able to say, well, what's really going on? What are you really afraid of? What do you really think is going to happen? To get people to dig deep down takes a long time. And I think it's still worth it. And I think there's probably a way you can come at it that both says, well, I don't know if that's factually true. Let's go look that up together. And then, yeah, right, you got a smartphone. And then to say, and tell me, why did that sound convincing to you? Like, what persuaded you that that was true? Because we all have bias, right? That's this fake news stuff around the election tells us we all have bias, and we all love to have our bias confirmed. And when we begin to have these conversations with each other, well, why didn't you look that up on Snopes? Why didn't you Google that? Why did you just say, oh yeah, that's probably true? Does that help us begin to open up to each other and say, oh, okay, so I hear you saying, you think everybody who's a Muslim is a terrorist. But, that's at odds with what I know about Muslims, which is that it's a religion of peace with a few extremists, in the same way that Christianity is a religion of peace with the KKK. And how do we begin to help each other tease those things out, both what's happening in me that makes that convincing to me, and what is the bigger context, what are the facts, what is the truth of the world? So hopefully that
a quick follow-up is I
Sure.
did ask him that, where did you learn that?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I didn't learn it on the internet, I heard it on the news.
Oh.
And that was his, and I used to work in television. I changed the subject at that point. And I thought that was actually the most loving, respectful thing to do in that moment.
Yeah,
Because my anger was escalating.
yeah, and sometimes it is. Sometimes, this is going to be a long haul engagement for us. Right? We're looking at a hugely divided country. There was a Pew Research Center study that found that half of Democrats were terrified of what a Republican administration would do, and half of Republicans were terrified of a Democratic administration, which means that at least a quarter of the country was going to wake up terrified the morning after Election Day, no matter who won. And of course, I don't like that I'm among the terrified quarter, but I also don't like living in a country where 25% of people were going to be terrified. And it takes a long time to heal that kind of fear and to bridge that kind of divide. And sometimes it takes saying, why don't we talk about the weather? Why don't we talk about how the nieces are doing? Let's just work on maintaining the relationship, and we'll come back to this another time, because it'll come up again. Of course it will. And it's going to be the work of lifetimes to get people to a better sense of how to live together again as a country without being so afraid of and angry at each other. And I say this as a person who's 33, so like a lifetime is a lot for me. I'm like, okay, God, 60 years of this. Okay, here we go. Because there's nothing else to do except for to figure out how to be in relationship with each other. That's the only thing we can do to go forward to help people heal at all. But yeah, absolutely step away when you need to. You have to take care of yourself too. That's part of long haul work.
I won't see him again until next summer.
Okay, nice break.
I have a question. I have a question and a comment.
Sure.
I just felt a really palpable sense of silence and really like people on the right of my family are really talking about it, which is kind of shocked. But I really think that this is the very, very beginning of our challenges. It's like the calm before the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think you're upset now, and you think you're understanding now, wait 3 years. I mean, we're people that are like starting to settle into the calm now. Well, nothing's happened yet, and it's really going to get crazy in a few years. And that's when we're really going to be challenged. It's not today. It's once changes have been made, once things have been undone, once things have been redone, and we totally don't agree with it. That's going to be when it gets crazy. And I just want to stand up for action and say maybe in 3 or 4 years we should stand up and like get a group of people together. We're going to go to Ohio, or go to Florida, or go to one of these swing states. And everyone has rent cars, and we get involved in the parties that are in those places, and we help people get to the polls, and like we be a part of the solution. Instead of just sitting back in Oregon, Blue Oregon, and like complaining about it. Like we should rise up together and do what we can to make changes, especially because we can vote by mail and we don't have to be here that day. So
Yeah.
we have this great opportunity.
True.
I think we should do it together.
And related to that, I want to say we had a service in Salem the Sunday after the election, and one of the things we asked people was, where are you finding hope right now? And one woman said, midterm elections. We said, that's right. In 2 years, there's going to be some change in congressional seats, which can make a difference too. So yeah, being engaged, being active is really important, doing what we can in our personal lives. And
Today
then,
is the beginning.
yeah, and this is the
Yeah,
beginning.
sure.
Yeah, we don't really know what's coming and what it's going to look like, but it sure doesn't look good from here. It's going to take a lot of commitment. Oh, one back there. Okay.
Stand in the way. I appreciate your message, and I'd like to be that way sometime about that election. I'm no longer there. I'm not there yet. I don't know when I'll get there. I do have a confession to make to everybody about my juvenile behavior a few weeks ago. The week after the election, I was in New York to see my little granddaughter Goldie, and I took a walk down Fifth Avenue and happened by Trump Tower, which was surrounded by a bazillion police. I'm an almost 70-year-old grandmother, retired teacher. I walked the entire block. This is really awful and not a solution, but it made me feel better. I put my arm way up in the air with my middle finger sticking out and walked by Trump Tower. I'm really sorry, but I did it, and it felt good. But I'll try to get better.
Thank you. I think honesty is really important. And I have an actual response. Which is that we all are having to cope with the grief of this election in our own ways, right? And anger is a stage of grief, can be an expression of grief. I think that it's okay to do that. Don't do it all the time. Let your feelings move through you. I was talking to a friend about this, and I said, a lot of the most oppressive forces in the country tell us that we shouldn't live in our bodies and we shouldn't feel our feelings. Right? You should just be basically a brain in a jar that works 80 hours a week for corporate America, right? Like that's held up as, don't take care of your body and don't have any feelings about anything. So to feel your feelings is actually part of the revolution that we need, right? To be able to say, I am really angry. And I did something that, maybe was kind of childish, but dang, it felt good. And it lets something move through you to do that. So do not feel like I'm asking you to set aside your feelings when I ask you to be connected to people and to work for change. Still feel your feelings, take care of your body, go for a walk, meditate, whatever. This is long haul work, right? Like, it's going to take a long time.
I think one thing that we often forget about is, well, maybe we don't forget about it, but one thing that we haven't talked about today is the role of social media in our lives. And one thing that really made this election hard for me during this time was like everybody attacking each other on social media. And your sermon was a welcome change to that feeling, like building a bridge as opposed to like finding our differences. And it's so easy to look at someone and see how different they are from us. It's so much harder to look at someone and see how we're the same, despite our differences in ideologies. So I guess for me it was useful to stop reading everybody's Facebook posts and stop reading those emails that I was getting from people who were upset and had so much anger, which I get it. I get the anger. I get the fear. I totally get that. I'm trying to find a place of living my life from hope and hope that we can find those bridges. And I feel like social media has really hurt that hope in me, and I think it's hurt that hope in a lot of people. So I don't know. I guess that's just something that I want to take away from this, is just not letting that social media rule me, and also not letting that also keep me in my own, not that I'm closed-minded, but not always be validated by the people around me who have the same opinions, but also appreciating other people's opinions as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to touch back on the part of your sermon where you talked about how within our fellowship, how we all have different wants and needs from our services, because that's something, as being on the worship committee, and I see nodding heads of worship committee members, that's something we struggle with, that we send out the survey every time after the services. Inevitably, there are people, love the sermon, it was just what I needed, and oh, that wasn't what I needed at all. And not always, but often that's the case. And I think keeping in mind, I loved your story of saying you looked over at a couple other people who said, were engaged and completely involved. That recognizing that every sermon's not going to meet our needs at that moment, but figuring out how it can, I think can go a long way in terms of building us as a community and staying connected. Because we've even had comments of, you do more sermons like that, I won't come back again, kind of thing. And it's like, wait a second, what can we do? Because we do try to do different types of sermons, different times. So I think bringing it back to our own community and thinking about how we are accepting of one another and our own needs too, I just love that message. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to say too, that's a super common UU problem. If anybody feels like, oh, why is this congregation struggling with that? Most UU congregations struggle with that, and that's why being pluralistic is tricky, right? We try and have a lot of different styles, a lot of different needs. It takes a lot of balancing.
I'm an old lady, so I can get away with a lot. The younger people don't. And my friend here who had the gesture in New York. I'm trying to do the opposite.
Good.
And I've shared this with a couple of people in the congregation, in the fellowship. I was in Walmart the other day, and I desperately looked for people to connect with. And there was quite a black lady there, African American, whatever she prefers to be called. And I looked, and she had some brooms sticking out of her basket. I was still with my daughter, so I walked over to her, and I said, "Don't you hit me with those handles." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "No, I just made that up to engage you in conversation." Because I just want you to know that my heart is with you and I'm thinking about you. And she said, "Can I give you a hug?" And we stood there in the aisle at Walmart and hugged for the longest time. And I told her I'd be honored to get her hug. I'm going to do this every chance I get. We have a wonderful fellowship here. I wish it were a little more colorful. But that being said, whenever I get a chance, I'm going to reach out to someone who must be frightened now. I mean, I've got this white skin, I've had it forever. But it doesn't mean that I can't reach out to people and try and feel what they are feeling. That's all.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm doing something against this horrible catastrophe that has befallen our country.
I think that's great. And I want to say, along those lines, I read an article that said, it's not right, but you would be amazed what goes smoother for people when a middle-class white person is with them. So when you run into one of your neighbors, something boring, like, "Oh, I have to go to the DMV and get my driver's license renewed." And you think, "Do you want me to just come with you and sit with you and just sort of be nearby?" It's not right and it's not fair, but it does help people be treated better when somebody who is coded as the most acceptable kind of person goes along. So for some of us, that's the kind of basic activism, which also builds relationships, that we can do. We just say, "Can I walk you to your car? Do you want to sit together on the bus?" Whatever it is that helps people feel less isolated and more like we're going to stand together as a country to survive the things that are going to happen.
We'll do one last question or comment.
Actually, this isn't a question, it'll save you for an announcement, but after the election, Tracy had sent out a note suggesting that those of us that had some discomfort about the election might want to meet and talk about it. And you received an email this week. Some of us did meet, and it was around just this fact of isolation, that we don't need to feel that isolated, that we belong to a group and we can sit and talk. And we decided that we'd like to continue this conversation. It's not a political rant. It's just talking about the things that are bothering us and how we might find things like Judy and that help us through this time. We're meeting again this Wednesday night at Beth's house, Roger and Beth Dell's house, at 7 o'clock, if anybody'd like to show up.
The email said 7:30.
It does? It's 7.
The email said 7:30.
Well,
If you come late, you have to bring extra chocolate.
yeah, 7 o'clock. It is 7 o'clock, and that's right. If you're late, you get extra chocolate.
I'll take it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you again, Monica.